If you're ready for a story, take a seat. If you're ready for a story, take a seat. Nod your head and tuck your feet. Make your hands all nice and neat. If you're ready for a story, take a seat. Good morning. My name is Angie. And I am the Youth Services Coordinator at the Galax-Carroll Regional Library, and I am so happy that you are here to share virtual story time with me today. It is a rainy day outside. I wonder if it is at your house too, raining right now. Is it raining outside? Yeah, there's going to be lots of mud puddles to play in later today. Well, today we are going to talk about presidents. Now, on Monday, this past Monday, it was President's Day. It was George Washington's birthday, and it's also a day that we celebrate our presidents. What does a president do? What does our president do? Do you know? Well, we're going to talk about that in this book called My Teacher for President. We're going to talk a little bit about what presidents do. Do you know who our president is right now? It's Joe Biden. That's right. He is our president right now. Presidents are in office for 4 years at a time. So Mr. Biden will be our president for 4 years, and then there will be an election, and maybe he'll be our president again for 4 more years, or maybe a new president will come in. But every 4 years in the United States, we have an election to elect a new president. So our first book today, it's a nonfiction book, which means that it's not a made-up story. It's real, and it's called President's Day. I'm just going to read a few pages from it that talk a little bit about President's Day. Honoring our leader. On President's Day, we honor our country's leader. This person is chosen by the people. Every 4 years, grown-ups vote for a new president. And this is the president's house, the White House in Washington, D.C. Isn't that a beautiful house? Have any of you ever gone to Washington, D.C. to see the White House? It's pretty amazing. Sometimes when the grown-ups go and vote, they elect the same leader again, but no one can be president more than twice. So after that, someone else gets a turn. And in this picture, that's President Reagan. He was our president. And he's getting sworn into office. That means that he is taking an oath to say that he will lead our country. How President's Day began. When your grandparents were born, President's Day was not celebrated. In its place were 2 other holidays. Every state celebrated George Washington's birthday on February 22nd. And many states celebrated Abraham Lincoln's birthday too. That falls on February 12th. Washington was our first president, that's George Washington, and Abraham Lincoln was our 16th president. So President's Day kind of falls between their 2 birthdays, and that's why we celebrate it then. So that's a little bit about President's Day. Next, we're going to read about My Teacher for President. How many of you have a teacher that you think would make a great leader of our country? I know lots of teachers that I think would be great for that job. Let's read about why this little boy thinks his teacher would be the best. This was written by Kay Winters and illustrated by Denise Brunkus. It was published by Scholastic, and we have permission to read it on our virtual story time today. It starts out with a letter. Dear Channel 39, I saw on TV that elections are coming up. At school, we have been learning about the president's job. My teacher would be just right. Let me know what you think. I wonder why he thinks his teacher would be a great president. Let's find out. My teacher loves White Houses. So she must have some pictures in her classroom of White Houses. And here is his teacher with her moving boxes moving into the White House. She's used to being followed around everywhere. So there's his teacher being followed by all the children in the class. And here she is as president being followed around by her Secret Service agents. Those are people who are in charge of keeping her safe. And by the media, the press. So newspapers and televisions like to follow the president around and take pictures and record videos too. When my teacher walks into a room, people pay attention. So there's the teacher coming into the classroom, and there's the teacher walking down the hall getting saluted. Teacher as president. The little boy is imagining himself there with his teacher as the president too. My teacher goes to lots of meetings. Here she is with her students meeting, and with a parent meeting, and with other teachers meeting. And then in this picture, that's when she's the president. She's in a big meeting with lots of people. And they're eating donuts. I'd like to go to that meeting. She's always signing important papers. So there she is signing a charities bill. My teacher acts quickly when there's an emergency. So what's happening in this picture? It looks like the class pet, a snake, has gotten loose. Oh my goodness. And so the teachers act quickly to catch it back up. And here as president, it looks like there's been a hurricane or a flood, and she's helping people in that emergency as well. She says healthcare is important. In this picture, she's taking care of her student with a a hurt leg. And in this picture, she's helping open a new hospital. My teacher likes to go on trips. So she's on a field trip in this picture, and as president, she's traveling all over the world, which is something you do as president. You travel all over the world and meet other leaders from other countries. She deals with the media every day. There she is. Now you guys might not know what this is because this is a little bit of an older book, but this is how movies used to be watched on tapes that you put into the TV. And here she is as president talking to the media, to the newspapers, and to the television stations. My teacher would be good for the country. She wants to clean up the earth. There they are picking up litter as a class. And here they are. Here she is as president planting a tree. She finds jobs for people. So here she is telling her students different things to do. This student's going to water the plants, and this one's going to feed the fish. This one's going to wash the board. And here she is as president helping people find jobs for her campaign to get her elected. She is a very good listener. That's an important thing for a teacher and a president to do. She believes in peace. So here she is as a teacher. What is she doing there? She's keeping your students from getting into a fight. And here as president, it looks like she's got two world leaders and they're shaking hands. Maybe they've agreed on something. My teacher would make a great president. I think the whole class feels that way. Love, Oliver. P.S. Just make sure she doesn't leave before the end of the school year. The end. I think Oliver is right about that book. There are lots of things that his teacher does as a teacher that would be great as a president as well. Oh my goodness. All right, well, who wants to talk about money now? Yeah, let's talk about money for a minute. Because if you look on money, you will see that there's a president's face on every piece of our money. So if you ever get some change laying around your house or somebody gives you some money, you can look on it and see that there's a president's face on there. Now sometimes it's confusing and you don't really know which president is on there, so I've got a little song for that. Join in. We'll put some money up here. We'll talk about whose face is on which dollar and which coin. The tune is To Mary Had a Little Lamb, so you know that tune, I bet. And it goes like this. Do you know who's on the penny, on the penny, on the penny? Do you know who's on the penny? Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln is on the penny. Next is the nickel, and it's worth 5 cents. Do you know who's on the nickel? On the nickel, on the nickel. Do you know who's on the nickel? Thomas Jefferson. So there's Thomas Jefferson on the nickel. Next we have the dime. It's worth 10 cents. Do you know who's on the dime? On the dime, on the dime. Do you know who's on the dime? Franklin Roosevelt. And the last coin we have is what? The quarter. And how much is the quarter worth? 25 cents. Do you know who's on the quarter? On the quarter, on the quarter. Do you know who's on the quarter? He was our first president, George Washington. Very good. All right, now we'll go to the dollar bills. Do you know who's on the dollar? On the dollar, on the dollar. Do you know who's on the dollar? He was our first president. And he's also on the quarter, George Washington. Do you know who's on $5? On $5, on $5. Do you know who's on $5? He's also on the penny, Abraham Lincoln. Very good. And our last one, $10. Do you know who's on $10? On $10. On $10. Do you know who's on $10? Alexander Hamilton. He was not a president. He was just the Secretary of the Treasury, but that's okay. Yay, great job, you guys. I think you're going to know the presidents really soon, especially if you start looking at the money. You can tell who the presidents are. Okay, well, we have one last book today before we wrap up our President's Day virtual story time, and it is called Grace for President. It was written by Kelly DiPuccio and pictures by Luam Pham. It was published by Hyperion Books for Children, and we have permission to read it on virtual story time today. Grace for President. One Monday morning in September, Mrs. Barrington rolled out a big poster with all of the president's pictures on it. Grace Campbell could not believe her eyes. Where are the girls? That is a very good question, said Mrs. Barrington. The truth is, our country has never had a woman president. No girl presidents ever? Grace asked. No, I'm afraid not, said Mrs. Barrington. Grace sat at her desk and stewed. What does it mean to stew? Do you know? It means to think about it. She really stewed and thought about it. No girls? Who'd ever heard of such a crazy thing? Finally, she raised her hand. Yes, Grace? I've been thinking it over, and I'd like to be president. Several students in the class laughed. Well, I think that's a star-spangled idea, Grace, said Mrs. Barrington. In fact, we can have our own election right here at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. The laughing in the room stopped. Grace smiled. Would anyone else like to run for president? Mrs. Barrington asked the class. Nobody raised their hand. Becoming president was gonna be easy, Grace thought. The next day, Mrs. Barrington made an announcement. In the name of democracy, I've invited Mr. Waller's class to join our election. Their class has nominated Thomas Cobb to be their presidential candidate. Grace's heart sank. Thomas was the school spelling bee champion. His experiments were always taking the blue ribbon at the science fair, and he was the captain of the soccer team. Becoming president was going to be not so easy after all, Grace thought. Oh dear, Grace has some competition about who's going to be the school president. The teachers put the names of all 50 states and the District of Columbia into a hat, and everyone except for Grace and Thomas got to choose a state. I'm Texas, said Anthony. I'm New Hampshire, said Rose. I'm Michigan, said Robbie. What does the number 17 mean? Each state is assigned a number of electoral votes. That number is determined by how many people live in that state, said Mrs. Barrington. Each of you will be a representative for your state. Altogether, our country has 538 electoral votes, Mr. Waller explained. On election day, the candidate who receives 270 electoral votes or more wins the election. Why 270? Asked Rose. That's more than half of all the electoral votes, Mr. Waller said. Becoming president really wasn't going to be so easy, Grace thought. Now, that's a lot of information right there, but it talks all about how our country elects our president with electoral votes from each state. Each state has a number, and that number depends on how many people live in that state. And when we elect a president, our state gets that many votes in electing for president. It can be a little confusing. Grace came up with a campaign slogan, Make history, vote Grace Campbell for president. Thomas came up with his own campaign slogan, Vote for Thomas Cobb, the best man for the job. Grace listened to what issues were important to the students, and she made a list of campaign promises. A peaceful school, no bullies. A cleaner school, no littering. Better hot lunches, no more fish stick tacos. I could agree with that one. Thomas made up his own list of promises. Free tutoring, free soccer lessons, fish stick tacos every week. I guess Thomas likes the fish stick tacos. But Grace made campaign posters and buttons, and Thomas made posters and buttons too. This is going to be a tough competition for president. Whew. Each week, the teachers set aside time for the candidates to meet with their constituents. Constituents are the people that the president represents. So we are all constituents for President Biden. Polls were taken. Voters were making their choices. So Grace is making a speech here telling her constituents all about all the things she's going to do. And it looks like Thomas is also making a speech to all of his constituents about all the things he's going to do as president. At recess, Grace gave speeches. During lunch, she handed out cupcakes. After school, she held rallies. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't worried. He had cleverly calculated that the boys held slightly more electoral votes than the girls. At recess, Thomas studied his spelling words. During lunch, he worked on his latest science experiment, and after school, he played soccer. So Thomas isn't campaigning very hard. He's not trying to get the votes like Grace is. Even before the election, Grace made good on her promises. She joined the safety squad. She organized a school beautification committee, and she volunteered her time in the school cafeteria. So Grace is really working hard as president. She's doing all kinds of things to show her constituents that she'll be a good president. In November, Woodrow Wilson Elementary School hosted a special Election Day assembly. Grace and Thomas took their places on stage, and the school band began to play. Henry was the first representative to the microphone. The Yellowhammer State of Alabama casts its 9 electoral votes for Thomas Cobb. Fletcher said, the last frontier state of Alaska cast its 3 electoral votes for the best man for the job, Thomas Cobb. And Hannah called out, the Grand Canyon state of Arizona casts its 10 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. And so it went. State after state after state cast their electoral votes. The scoreboard in the gymnasium kept track of the totals. The voting demonstration was quickly coming to an end. Clara approached the podium. The Badger State of Wisconsin cast its 10 votes for my best friend, Grace Campbell. Grace looked at the scoreboard. Thomas had 268 electoral votes. She had 267. There was only one state still accounted for. Oh my goodness, so Thomas is winning by just 1 vote. It's a tight race. Wyoming is the last state. What do you think is going to happen? Will it be Grace or will it be Thomas? Let's find out. Thomas grinned. Grace felt sick. Sam walked up to the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Grace. He looked down at Grace's handmade flag. Sam didn't say a word. What are you waiting for? Thomas whispered. The band stopped playing. All eyes were on Wyoming. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. The equality state of Wyoming cast its 3 electoral votes for Grace Campbell! The gymnasium erupted in loud cheers and a few boos. Mrs. Barrington approached the podium. With 270 electoral votes, the winner is Grace Campbell. Thomas looked stunned. Grace hugged Sam. Why did you do it? She asked. Sam handed Grace his flag. Because, he said, I thought you were the best person for the job. The following week, the students in Mrs. Barrington's class were preparing for their career day presentations. Grace volunteered to go first. She stood in front of the room and glanced at the poster still hanging on the wall with all the presidents on it. My name is Grace Campbell, and when I grow up, I'm going to be President of the United States. This time, everyone believed that she would. The end. And there's a picture of Grace in the future being sworn in as president in front of the White House. Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining me as we learn more about presidents and President's Day here on Virtual Storytime. I hope that you have a wonderful week and will join me again next week. Thanks for sitting. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming here today. Now that story time is over, hope you have a lovely day. Bye, you guys. See you next week.